Hello. We are live, I think. This is going to be a small little art tutorial, mostly directed at my friends Dylan and Jacob, who are currently working on Inkarnate themselves. And I wanted to show them how to make neat little art projects in this software. I feel like that's something that is important to do. I wanted to put all my tips and tricks in a nice little video so that they could see how some of my stuff is made. I have a lot of maps I'm not particularly proud of. I have a lot of maps in here that are very old, and that kind of show off a lot of issues when you're starting out with something like Inkarnate. For example, here's a good example of an issue when you're starting out that's very easy to do. And I call this singular stamp spam. This is really easy to do. You'll get like one good stamp, you're like, oh, I like that. And then you'll put like 40 of it down. And then you'll like do like one color ground, maybe two. And then you'll be like, oh, look at this. I made a good map. This is fine. It's serviceable. But you really need to understand what you're trying to build when you go to build one of these maps. So let's go to something that I have done more recently, I suppose. Let's go to my pirate setting, because a lot of this is very recent, and I'm pretty proud of most of these maps. You'll notice a lot, and we're going to pick up this one here. This is just a normal battle map, not a lot going on. We have a party going on here. And what I think makes my maps look a little bit better, this link gold is just a little like short recording video thing that I wanted to put out there for some of my friends. I'm not even really going to be live, but you're welcome to sit around and view. This will not take longer than an hour. So when it comes to a map like this, there's a few things I need to keep in mind. First off is scale. I need to remember that each of these is 5 by 5. This is a very large section of ground. A 10 by 10 is like a bedroom. You can fit, I think my current bedroom is like this big. um this size area is like my entire bedroom, which I would say is a fairly well-sized room. It's also kind of big. This chair does not actually take up a 5 by 5 slot. This is a great example of balancing readability, practicality, and actual scale. If I had a chair that I wanted to be important, I made it like this, right? That's a little too big. That's out of the scale. It's readable. It takes up the whole space. So only one person could fit in there, but that's too big. You want your chairs to be kind of small, but you only want one per tile. Realistically, this chair should be like this big, maybe this big, somewhere in that. I could see you fitting a few chairs in this 5 by 5 space. Not everyone's ass is this big. However, you also have to keep in mind, most people are going to be looking at your map from here. And if we make that chair the realistic size, that's kind of hard to see. So you want to both balance your scale and your readability, and that's where you're going to have to make compromises. Like these tables. I scaled them to be very readable. There is the table tile, and then the little tiles it kind of overflows into. If I wanted this to be accurate, it would probably be something a bit more like this. But then I'd have to make all the chairs smaller. So I made the tables about one tile and a little extra. The tents, these I made sure to keep at a very small scale. You'll notice that they're about a tile and a half. These are pretty big tents, so I believe it's not very hard to imagine them being used. The trees are also fairly large. Same with the shrubbery, the stone, these crates. But also keep in mind, I'm trying to keep this in this grid. You'll notice that these barrels, like this is a barrel tile, this is a barrel tile. These three corners here are a crate tiles. This rock here has its tiles defined by its shape, its structure. I'm trying to keep it all in this grid, but also giving it a little bit of variance, letting it overflow, letting it be sideways, crooked, or whatever, just so it breaks up a little bit. Especially with constructed items of large importance, I base it very heavily in the grid, as if the grid itself was structured around that item. During this party, there was the big bonfire here, there's the stage, there's everyone down here, there's the big instruments and stuff. So this is pretty much my prime example of balancing both scale and readability. We will not be saving. Let's make a new map. Oh yeah, we also have to talk about density. That's something else I see a lot of people messing up. We're going to open up this Cold North map. That's a great example of density. Density is basically trying to clump details together to create a non-uniform image that is more interesting to look at. For example, these forests use density. These paths use density. Because these paths are empty, the forest is full. You know that this is some sort of path or gap in the forest. This is the dense part of the forest. There are these mountains that break up the forest. There's some cliffs and rocks and hills and such. And when I want to communicate that something is increasingly rocky, hilly, or intraversable, I will use more and more dense mountains to create that sense of density. I notice a lot of people, when they'll do a map, will do like 1 or 2 trees every tile at a very low density, rather than packing these fucking things in here. There's no limit to the amount of trees you can put on these maps, guys. You can put a lot of trees down on these maps. Secondly, you also have to get a sense of scale in here. While these maps are representative of terrain, people intuitively know that trees are smaller than mountains. And if you have small mountains, they're shorter than big mountains. So if you have like a little hill here, and there's a bunch of trees around it, that communicates to us that this hill is of significance enough to go above the trees and to be marked on this map. You'll also notice that I am prioritizing trying to keep certain tiles clear. While this area here is obviously like a little overgrown, this was intentional. This area was going to be a sort of, you're in the forest anyways, but this is where the path would be. You can also see that I have buildings marked very clearly within the grid. That way that these would be locatable and measurable. And the third thing I notice people do a lot is they make their grids really obvious. They'll slam that up to like this or something, or like here. And I'll be like, that's fine. You probably don't need that though, because if you're gonna put this in like Foundry or Roll20, and then you need to put a grid down, it's already gonna have a grid, right? Now, granted, you do need a grid in order to scale this correctly, but look at this. You can just turn the grid off, and everything is still on grid. I normally put my grid at about 1.9 or 1.1. I mean, this is about where I have my grid when I'm doing an export to Foundry. It's there, but it's very faint, and it lets me change the grid opticity when I'm in Foundry, because Foundry will have its own grid. You can turn off Foundry's grid as well, and you could go like the map is completely gridless until players start to measure, which is a very interesting idea. I haven't personally done that, but you could experiment. It's your game. We're going to make a map. Let's save. I'm going to make a map, and I'm going to make a battle map first. We're going to go with square. I always go with square, especially for battle maps. I always pick a consistent size. It's the easiest thing to do for yourself is to pick a consistent size for these maps, because if you do that, if your maps are always 40 by 40, you don't need to rescale the grid every time you make a new map in Foundry. You can just duplicate one of the maps you've already scaled out correctly to the grid and then replace the background image so it already lines up. I want to do a desert map because you know what? I've got a desert campaign coming up and I need to do some desert stuff. So let's think about this here. Background is usually best saved for water, foreground is usually best saved for the general terrain, top is used for details. So I'm going to add everything to the foreground. This is my first move. This is what I always do, is I will just take this whole selection and click, add it all to the foreground. Why? Because if I want to do a pond or something, we just do that, and boom. The water lines go from the foreground to the background. These little ripples. And it intuitively tries to tell your brain that this is below this by making this little fade here and making a little shadow here so that your brain thinks, oh, this is lower. That effect is something I try to utilize rather than fight. And I will notice something people will often try to do is say that they want to do a house. They'll do something like this. Then they'll, make their walls on their house or whatever. And after they make their walls, whoops. Let me merge shapes. Add. And then we will change this to a wall of some kind. I know I have one here. There has to be one here. Yeah, sure. Good enough. So they'll make a house like this, and then they'll never get rid of this ripple effect, and it looks really weird when they go to paint this floor as anything other than water. Because they'll pick up something like a basic wood. And that looks weird, right? Like, you notice this? You want to know the trick to this? You just don't use this tool. You can just do this with the grid brush. Oop, on the foreground. Boom. Done. You've gotten rid of the ripple effect, and you've made this look a little bit better. Something else I'm going to tell you, rescale your background images. The default Foundry way overscales these. You can actually get these down to the grid size by going down here to advanced settings, and you go to your texture scale, and you go like 40, and this will normally line it up with the grid. Normally. Let's turn on the grid here. Look at that. It's aligned to the grid by setting the scale to 40. This is on grid. And if you get rid of the grid, it will still look pretty good. I'm going to leave my grid a little bit more visible for working, but most textures you can just do that and they will work 100% of the time. Now, what was I doing? I was trying to do a desert map, and I got a little sidetracked. I think I'm going to do an oasis that has a small ruined structure next to it. I'm not really going to plan this out. I'm just going to kind of make it, but I do know what I want to make before I get started. So because this is an oasis, the ground would probably be a bit more cracked than sand. So we're going to go with a cracked earth texture, and instead of trying to do that, we're going to select the whole map again and click apply. I think this texture is a little big, so I'm going to go over here and I'm going to go to texture scale and I'm going to set this to 50. This is a natural texture, which we don't need to have super aligned with the grid. That's okay. You can even rotate this texture if you want to, and it will look pretty good. So now that we've done that, we have our basic texture. Most people would just call it here, but you need to have something that breaks up this pattern. So taking something like a yellow sand or an orange sand, and then you take a basic circular brush, you make this as big as possible, you turn down the opacity a little, you keep the softness really high, and then you just kind of paint inwards. You kind of want to border your entire thing a little bit. You don't want it to be super even, so I'm going to sort of elect to have this a little off center, and we will paint inwards. I'm also going to go back to the first one and paint over this a little bit, just to give it a bit more mix. This mixing effect will help a lot when it comes to making this look a bit more natural, and it will break up the texture a lot. I'm also doing like very very short like tap and swish motions with my mouse, not trying to make straight lines, and I think this looks a little bit better. Now, I'm going to place the Oasis down. I think that I'm going to use this brush here for now. Oop, and we need to go to the subtract mode. And I'm going to go here. And I'm going to make the little puddle like this. Now, it's a little big, but I think that's okay. We'll show the grid. Now, I'm looking at this and I'm going, it's a bit too big. We're going to add to the outside of it just to remind myself that this is a very large map, actually. I could make the grid smaller. I probably should, because this is for a Pathfinder game. So if I want to make the grid smaller, I'm going to go here, and I'm going to try and make it so that the grid aligns with both edges of the box. Normally, that you can do this fairly easily on just the tens place. So if I set this to 30, that aligns to the edge of the box. If I set this to 20, that aligns to the edges of the box. I think 30 is a good size. It gives me a little bit of room to breathe without being too claustrophobic. If I was doing this for like one singular encounter, I'd probably use 20, but 30 is totally acceptable in this situation. If you set it to something queer like 25, you're going to like 27. Oh yeah, that's right. Because we're on squares, you can set it to whatever the hell you want. I forgot. I was thinking about hexamagons. So hexamagons get a little funky because you can't infinitely scale, but you do want it to have it so that that like little jagged corners on one edge and it's cutting halfway through on the other, which tends to happen on certain numbers. Sorry. You can set your squares to whatever you want. I try to set them to a reasonable middle ground number. We're going to keep this map scaled at 25, which I think gives me a lot of space over here, gives me a little bit of space over here. I'll build my oasis here, the little hut that I want to have here down here, and we can leave that these two sides are empty to give the impression of there being a lot of desert to the left and right of this location. I want to make this oasis looks like it has a bit of moisture, more so than the surrounding area, so I'm going to give this a little bit of ground, and then I'm going to paint over that ground with a little bit of grass. We can find some good patchy grass. Now, the reason I put down that first texture just to paint over it was because you see how we get this nice little transitionary gradient from grass to that dirt to the cracked ground. Even though the dirt was not as important as this area, it outlines this grass in a way that says, hey, there's still a lot of moisture here. And I'm even going to take this dirt and, just kind of tap it around a little bit, tap back on it. Because you want to hide these circles. The circle of the brush is something you really don't want to have everybody seeing. So you want to have it a little bit obfuscated. I'll even tap a little bit of grass outside the area just to give it a hint of green, as if some old survivor was trying to hold on. Now, the background. We're going to click on this, and we're going to find a very clear water or a very muddy water. I think I'm going to go for a very clear water because this probably would look more appealing. So I'm going to pick one that's got like a nice bright color. I'll probably pick this one. How does this look? I really like that one. So we're going to take this water, and then I'm going to take a ground texture, and then I'm going to turn the opacity way down, and I'm going to sort of outline this. Because what that will do is will make the water look more shallow. So we get this sort of transitionary effect from the like deeper water, from the shallower water to the deeper water, leaving the edge of the water. You can even do this in inverse, onto the ground here, sort of making it so that the grass isn't grown right up to the water. There's a little bit of that dirt barrier. You probably want to do this with a smaller brush though, as to not overdo it. But this is also something you should do to detail and highlight your areas, doing little circular motions with your mouse to make sure that you're not getting a very clean or consistent line, because nature isn't clean or consistent. It does weird stuff all the time. All right, we have the basis of the oasis. Now I'm going to think about the layout I want for this hut. I don't want it to be very big. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our brush tool. We're going to go to foreground, and I'm going to find probably a beat up wood. If that, I might just do a solid ground. Perhaps. Because picking the correct texture is as important as picking... Yeah, we'll pick Pirate Shelter Floor. I do love the Pirate Shelter art because it's very ragged and beat up. And a lot of the places that players are going to be going is ragged, beat up places. We're going to set the opacity to 100% again. And I'm going to kind of eyeball where I want this. And I think about here. Now I'm going to look at that and I'm going to think to myself about one of our earlier lessons. Scale and readability. I feel like this is far too readable and not enough in scale, so we're going to undo that and we're going to go down to our texture scale and we're going to set this to 40. 40 is just like my favorite number when I do this work. And boom, look at that. And I think that's still readable even from out here, probably even more so because you can actually see more of these crappy wooden planks. I'm going to set the hut to be this big. This is a fairly big hut. It probably would be a comfortable location for somebody to live in. Now, you can do this a few ways. You can absolutely make a... You can click snap to grid, and you can just make this, and then this. Whoops. You make that, and then you can go like that, and then boom, we have this. And we can subtract a little opening in the front. I forget how to do that. There's a way to do that. I forget how to do that. Oh, yeah. Add a portal. We can add a portal here, which will create an opening in our hut. You can do this a few times. I'm currently popping out some holes in the wall, but I don't want to do that off grid. I want to do that on grid. So I'd probably put that here, and I would probably put one here as our sort of hut layout. You could leave this here. This is okay. But now that we have holes in the wall, the dirt's going to get in. And the dirt's going to get in probably a little bit like this, a little bit like this. And then we can use this dirt, and we can turn the opacity way down, and we can go like this. And because this is inside, it might actually be a little dirty in here. So we're going to turn down the opacity way more, and we're going to put a little bit of dirt on the hut. Now this dirt texture might be a little big for this. So you know what I'm going to do to this? I'm going to set it to 40. I'm going to go over here. Look at that. We get this like sort of textured dirt in the corner. It kind of looks like beans, doesn't it? This dirt texture looks a bit like beans. But just putting a little bit of dirt breaks up the patterns. It makes it look nice. We can then lock these walls because I'm not going to change them. But we can also come over here and change them anyways, because I am thinking of finding something a bit more ragged. Pirate Shelter Wall definitely works here, and I think that's the one I might go with. We may go with something stone, though, like stone desert wall. Probably not broken stone desert wall. If I can find a stone desert wall that's not broken, we might go with that. In fact, why am I scrolling? We could just... Oh. We can make this a bit more scaled up. Yeah, I kind of like that, you know. Then we can have... Now we're going to look for the parts for that. So that was hut wall. Let's go look under the tag of hut. Broken. a little bit of dirt, a little bit of ruin, a little bit of rocks and stones. I'm going to shrink this and put a few down in here. And around, actually. You should probably put a few stones on the map always. Though I don't like having these have a shadow, so I always select all, and then I will go over to their stamp properties, and I will go to shadow none. The reason I get rid of the shadow on these is it makes it look like it's a bit more flat to the ground. Ah, and making it look a bit more flat to the ground helps it a lot. Helps it a lot. It makes it look prettier. It makes it look better. You can also do some of these like more color appropriate ones if you want to blend in more. And once more with density, I'm going to sort of create areas of these stones rather than spreading them out evenly. It might be very tempting to put them all in one, across the whole map, but I'm just going to try and spread them out a little bit. I think these stones are a little large from what I would usually do, but I'm not going to like fuss that much about it. Now I still have the grid tool on because it doesn't really matter when I'm doing this kind of work. I'm adding a few of these. Select all. Oh, nope. Select all stamps from the set. None. This way that these can be flatter to the ground. And these don't look like they're deserty. They look like they're very... I'm going to color them like this. I'm going to desaturate them a little bit. I'm going to turn down their brightness a hair just to put some larger wooden planks on the ground in here. Next, I want to make this wall look like it's fallen apart. So I'm going to look for something in the lines of broken or falling apart pieces of wood. Ooh, this right here, a great example of something that can do a little bit of storytelling for you. Something burst through this wall now by putting this down. You can tell that because of the way that this floor was ripped up in this direction, so we're going to have all of this wall be broken inwards rather than outwards. So from there, what can we find for broken wall stuff? Well, we can get some of these. I want to kind of position it so that it looks like it's fallen inwards, not fallen outwards. We're going to turn off snap to grid now, finally. And see how this is kind of in the wrong spot? I want to move this down a layer and then move this down a layer. But I can do something like this. And that looks a bit more like this wall was knocked over. I want to put some sleeping arrangements in here. We could probably also do like a door that's been knocked inwards on this side. Like, oh, look at that. You know, the door's been knocked in. Actually, I kind of want to put one of these planks below the door so that the door looks like it's been here a little while, you know. We're also going to put some furnishing now. I don't think all of the furnishing inside of here is going to be shattered, broken, and ruined, but I do think a good portion of it is going to be. So let's find perhaps some sort of table or bed first. That's almost always a good place to start. Because how a person lives in a place becomes very important to how that place looks. We'll even add this little furnace here. It gets cold at night in the desert. We can add like some sort of outside clutter as if there was something important here, maybe a rack. You don't have to like look at this. No one is going to look at this right away and say, "Oh, that's a sled." They're going to look at that and go, "What the hell is that?" You can point to this and say, "Oh, it looks like some sort of rack, some sort of bundle of something, perhaps a storage, perhaps a crate." This is a contextless image that if you say it's a sled, it then becomes a sled. But it doesn't have to be one. A torn up bedroll makes a lot of sense for the type of comfort that this hut seems to lack. We could also have some sort of bro. This is really funny. We could put that there to sort of like really throw home the idea that this wall was just blasted inwards. I'm probably going to put it a little bit more forward, but I like that. That broken in half bench fits really well there. Then I think we have a couple ruined seats, just some old rustic chairs. And then we're going to put one that's actually still good. Well, we'll do that later. But as you see, we're slowly building out this, like, story here of something burst down this wall. Actually, what could be more interesting is not having the door lay like that, is having the door lay like this. Because what this says here is something burst in here and then burst out here. Now, who was the person that lived in here? We probably will never find out. It might not be important, it might be important. But what really matters when we're doing this kind of work is giving ideas. You're not trying to say that this person was some sort of old desert hermit who hunted small game and was researching little secrets of the universe. You need to sort of just plant that idea. You don't need to have every detail thought out ahead of time either. I'm currently browsing for something like a book, but if I find something different, I might go for that first. I'm also going to put down some crates. I'm going to make these a little bigger and try to have them be almost pilfered into, as if over the years some scavengers and travelers have stopped here for their small little pieces of loot. We'll have a nice bookshelf that was wrecked over here, maybe one over here as well. And boom, we have this little hut out here that's been absolutely fucking thrashed. We're telling a little story about how the monster moved through this area. We're telling a story about its age by having everything in here be kind of beat up and in ruin. And I think that this area is a high density of detail, so it will draw up players' attention, their eyes, and they don't have to worry as much about these open areas. You don't have to have every place on the map be ridiculously detailed like this. In fact, you really don't want every place on the map to be very detailed like this. Now, let's find some trees. Tree. Now, little oases like this, I always associate with like the palm tree, the sparse shrubbery, that sort of thing. So I'm gonna put a tree here, and I'm also going to find one of these stump items. I'm going to have it down here. I'm going to place it, and I'm going to move it to a layer lower. That way, I very subtly will be giving this tree some roots. And it gives it some more depth, it gives it some more layers, it makes it look a little bit more interesting, as if its shade is just that little bit more. Then I'm going to put a few pieces of wood around here. You know, this is a piece of nature, so there are going to be some things around. A couple old logs that fell forever ago. We're probably going to get maybe like a palm tree of some kind, so we should do like a couple of them. And then we can get something a bit more sparse, a bit more shrubbery. I can't search shrub, so let's just scroll down to the desert and see what we can't find for bushes. Heyo, there we go. I'm going to put these more at the edge. I'm going to also try and clump them a little bit so that there is bushes in more dense groups. I'm going to put one at the water's edge. And next, I am going to look for anything that catches my eye into adding on this. And I think that's pretty nice. I don't think we need to add too much more. We can add maybe a cactus. Keep in mind that cactuses really don't do well in the desert. I know that's something that people like really associate with the desert, but that's not really where the cactus grows. Cactus grows in these weird areas where there is dry terrain, but it's not sand. Sand is just so hostile to life that not a lot of things can grow there. Now, I think this looks pretty darn good so far. However, one, I don't like how even these rocks are, so I'm just going to move them all in and just intermingle them a little. Two, I think that the area is a little too flat, so I want to make this feel a bit more interesting, so we're going to get some cliffs going. Now, I tend to use this for my cliffs. There should be a desert cliff. Then we can flip this so it's always facing the way I want it to be. We can increase the scale. Oh, this is the wrong cliff. There was a different one I was thinking of. Well, let's look through the cliffs. Let's look through the cliff. Well, I obviously don't want to use anything too height demanding, so I'm going to use one of these. And we've already sort of painted this corner as the oasis being lower terrain. And I think that makes some sense. So we're going to move this as a cliff. We're going to move this as a cliff as well. And we're also going to flip that the correct direction. Now we have some sort of contesting high grounds around the area. We can, and to sort of sell this high ground, I'm going to make it a bit more dry. I'm going to apply this texture a little bit more. I'm going to be a bit more heavy-handed on this texture. I'm even going to use probably a darker color because you want to have the texture of your high ground be different than the texture of your low ground. It helps separate the two a lot more. That way it's both easier to read visually and looks a little nicer. You can have the upper part and lower part be similar texture, but this here will make it so that it's very obvious what's supposed to be the top and bottom at just a glance. We're going to change our blend mode. I want to make it so that the cliff face kind of blends a little better. I would like it to do... Screen might do it. Hue. Luminosity, color. Difference, exclusion, hard light. Overlay, probably... Overlay doesn't do it. I think screen was my best. Color dodge is probably best here. Then we're going to turn down the opticity on these cliffs just a hair to let it merge a bit better with the terrain around it. And we're going to click on this one. And I think we can go here and we click yes to the shadow. That way, while they have this shadow, they will be a bit more visibly higher up. And I think the shadow, we can do a little bit of offset. Turn up the intensity on the shadow a bit. And since I'm not getting the result I want out of this, I'm actually just going to hard bake the shadow in myself. By going in here, I'm going to find this texture here, this shadow texture. The reason I use the shadow texture and not a pitch black is because I just like the shadow texture a little bit more than the pitch black. you can totally like the black. I'm going to turn the opticity down, and I'm going to just slowly go over this area where the cliff is. You can do this any number of ways, but it's best to sort of do this at your own pace. And yeah, that's about the effect I wanted for that cliff face. I don't need this much shadow on this side though, because it's facing the light. Because I'm envisioning the light is coming from this top left corner and shining downwards. So I'm not going to put as much shadow here, but I will put a little bit on the edges that don't directly face my light source, which is over here somewhere. You could call it there, but why would I stop here? Next, I'm going to go to our slightly textured brush, and then we're going to sort of give this hut a bit of an outline. The hut matters a little bit, so I want to make it pop out a little. This 30% opticity does not do a lot all at once, but it does do some, especially when you go on it twice. Now, I'm going to tell you this. A really important trick is if you're working with opticity, remember that you can go back up and down. This will never stack an effect as long as you're still in one brush stroke. As soon as you go into a second brush stroke, it will stack the effect. So each stroke is less of a paintbrush and more of a selection of an area you wish to apply. And that's important to remember. Now I'm going to shadow under this door, and I'm going to shadow more heavily on this side of the building, because it is a building. This is a building. It's going to cast a bit of a longer shadow. That also helps it pop a little bit more. Same thing with this tree. I'm going to give it a little bit of shadow here and here. Give some there and there and there. See how I don't have to really be all that exact with this? I can just do a little dribble of it. And that makes the sun look a little bit harsher. I still don't like how this top left corner is so empty. I'm probably going to add some stones or rocks in order to break this up. Oops, wrong button. I'm actually going to use this rock. Now, this mossy rock probably looks pretty bad for a desert setting. I'm going to place it there. And now, keeping in mind the grid, I'm going to kind of place it on the grid. But if I hue shift this, I think I can get this to like a yellow, and I desaturate it a little bit to make it look a bit sandy. Is my goal here. Maybe I go like that. I don't think this looks outstanding, but I do think this might sell itself. I might turn the saturation down a hair and turn the hue over a few points, and then we could probably sell that as a sandy rock. We'll put a few of these around as if there was some sort of rock formation here. And we will do similar on this side. This map's probably a little overskilled for something like Pathfinder, but that's okay. I don't really need it to be outstandingly good. And so now that I've done that, I feel like the map is a little bit more balanced because I have an area of density here, an area of density here, and an area of density here. And I think that's not bad. I think I can save it here and be fairly satisfied with this Oasis map. We went from nothing to something pretty quickly there. Now we're going to back up, and I'm going to make a new map. and I'm going to make a fantasy regional map because I've been seeing a lot of my friends make these recently, and I wanted to give some tips for this. Normally, when I make a regional map, I like to go portrait. That's a personal preference. You can go landscape, but I feel like a lot of coastlines are going to be moving north to south. You won't have as many going east to west, and if you're doing an island especially, you really want to have that portrait space. Square is an acceptable middle ground, but I feel like you don't exaggerate if you're supposed to feel, because a landscape makes it feel like the environment you are in is an endless expanse. A portrait tends to make it feel like an environment you are in is a awe-inspiring monument. If you wanted your area to feel larger, you'd pick landscape. But if you want it to feel more imposing, you pick portrait. I like to go with portrait personally. Now, I go to the grid, I turn on the grid, and I turn on this grid because this will help you so much. This is not used for your actual map. This is just used so you can actually see a sort of guiding lines for how you're going to do this. So this grid serves as our guidance. It is not the end-all be-all of our map. Because if I make an island like this, right, you can see that this island has this curved shape, but it also helps you focus on where you want your design to be. You can add this little bit here, and it makes it feel like this is closer to the camera than this, and that you're looking at this in this angle. If I turn off the grid, and I don't use the grid, and I get rid of all of this like this, and then I try to build an island of a similar shape, it will naturally be a little bit flatter. And we'll do like this. And then you see how like this, even though it's kind of the same shape, it feels like you're looking at it from the top down, even though that we know that we were just looking at it from the side. That's an easy mistake to make. You have to make things a little bit more narrow on the top and bottom, even if you're doing this without a grid. I am going to turn on the grid, but I will not be using the grid tool. Now I'm going to build we'll just build a little island here with a little town on it. I'm going to build an island here. I like these little crescent shapes because it helps you build like this wide area here where you have a thing going on, then you have this like narrow path that you could skip by going over the water in this bay. It gives some interesting gameplay implications. So we'll go here, here. And then I want to do some mountains. I feel like this mountain is a little fucking big. So I'm going to go either shrink these mountains down, which is fine. You can definitely do that. By making this one big, we've made a little bit of a fun contrast going around. Where it's obviously there's this big important peak here in the middle, and all these are just like little add-on peaks. And we'll even make the ones on this tail a little bit smaller to give it that sort of scale. And we'll even go in here and we'll go find the other mountains because there's smaller mountains. And we can use these as we go down the island. And then we can transition even further into hills, which go like this. So we have this high density thing here. Now I want to put a forest down, so let's find some trees. And I'm going to teach you about the density brush, which is one of my favorite brushes in the game. So we're going to take these pine trees. Now, I could put pine trees down like this. That's really bad. So you want to go up here, you want to grab this area, and you want to scale it up a little bit. So you get this small brush, and you want to take this density, and you want to put it down to about 50 or 40. And then all of a sudden, you get this nice pine forest where you can see them. Now, if you want that forest to feel more dark, imposing, and dense, you scale that up to about 60. I feel like the default 100 scaling is way too much. But you can get this in here amidst the mountains and stuff. Now, I feel like these pines are a little big, so unless we're going for redwoods, I'm not going to leave them that large. I'm going to... Oh, they're already at 30 scale. I'm going to scale them down to like 20. Yeah, that feels a little bit better. And I'm going to move this brush around I'm going to make sure that the pines overhang on the back, but they do not overhang on the front to make sure that it really feels like there are 3D little pines around here. Next, I'm going to add a town. You can get these little prefab towns, which I absolutely adore, by the way, because what they do is they will. Why are you snapping to grid? I don't. Oh, yeah, because I have the area. So, something that goes on is if you leave this area tool on, it'll do weird things to some brushes. I like to do this, which will put this town neatly on the grid, and I think it looks really nice. Then from there, you could add all sorts of little details, but the most important part to add is scale, height, and interest. Make sure that you have things are not evenly dense. That's the easiest way to make interest. Now, one of the things I really love to do for these sorts of islands is to make these like cliff sides a thing. I like to use these cliff brushes because they will make wonderful amounts of scale and a little bit of interest and mystery. Because it's a fucking cliff. They're cool. And putting things on like the side of a cliff is cool. And so you can subtract, and it all of a sudden gives this like little bit of height to everything. And I'm gonna move these cliffs down a layer just so that that forest is on top of it. Ah. Ugh. I'm talking too much for the last 52 minutes. Then from there, you can go over here, and I think there is a dock or a port somewhere in here that you can use. But I've often kind of just cheated those in by making like little bridges or something. You could make something like these where it's like there's a large structure here, and then they've got like this massive staircase to it, and that would be really fucking cool, actually. I want to go with that. Like, oh, there's this big structure here. And you could even, on the other side of that, take this cliff face and go like here. And that will add even more to the grandiose feel of that structure. You can make this a little bigger if you wanted, just to sell that a little better. Or you can make it a little smaller to like point out just how titanic this wall is, as if there was something here before. That's up to you. That's your own detailing prerogative. That's kind of how I would recommend you focus on. See how I didn't even need to do much with the textures? Though if you are going to do stuff with textures, make sure you're sticking to the more simple, straightforward options. You're making sure you're gently texturing in around here, because I don't think that this map really needs very robust texturing. Though, I will say, adding some detail around the edge of the islands helps a lot. Because this whole ocean is as busy as that. That's a little bad. You turn down the opticity on this, you give it a little bit of, like, waves going back and forth, because this island does affect the water around it. It will stir it up. It'll make things a little bit more crazy. And then you find the like basic water, and then you come back in here. You do a little bit more of this to blend it a bit better. You and look at that. It makes the island pop. It's a little bit more interesting, a little fun to look at. And see how I didn't use this grid tool? But even if I turn this grid off, it still looks like this island is thicker this side and it wraps around like this rather than it being just like a short little circle. It's almost like a half circle. I think that having this grid tool on really helps guide your hand. All right. I think that's the end of some of my little tutorial for my friends. This was just done off the cuff because I saw some people working on Inkarnate and wanted to give some tips and tricks. I hope you all have a wonderful day.